Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this week's edition of the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast. We're back in the summer months to bring you a little bit of an update on what has been a flurry of announcements at Norwich City Football Club. No, obviously, games on the pitch to discuss, but plenty of it to talk about, to analyse, to discuss, to look ahead to, as, of course, Norwich City attempt to change the narrative from a dismal Premier League campaign, turn the dial, and hopefully get some people excited for what is to come. Of course, it is the Championship season to look forward to. Preparations are ramping up for that, and we are just a few weeks away now from Norwich City's opening pre-season game against Durham Town, even closer to the new fixtures for the season being released. That, of course, is the 23rd of June. But to join me to discuss the happenings of the last week, delighted to be joined by Sam Seaman and Adam Harvey to look back on what was a fairly hectic week. And that's not just the Killers coming to Carrow Road, which was arguably the best performance that Carrow Road has seen for quite some time. You can also make jokes about the stage in front of the Barclay and keeping that for next season to help with the defence if you like, but I won't, so you can do that at your own leisure. Gents, how are we? It's been a couple of weeks since we caught up. Sam, let's start with you. How's your summer going? I mean, the weather finally feels like it's catching up now. It feels a little bit more summery. It's all a little bit quiet on the Norwich City front, but probably understandably so.
Yeah, it's gone pretty slowly, to be honest, apart from those 3 or 4 days we had of announcements. Pretty much since we broke that news of the prospective investment in Norwich City, it's been quite quiet besides those. So obviously we're going to look back on that and discuss those things. But to be honest, personally, I'm just looking forward to getting back in the cycle of games and covering games. Obviously, we're not too far away now. Got to think we're not too far away because of that from sort of new kits and stuff. So yeah, hopefully the excitement is going to ramp up in the next few days or next couple of weeks, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I must admit my summer the last few days has been taken over by watching Joe Root's wonderful batting, which will mean little to some people out there. But there we go. So I'm not quite in the stage of really missing football on a Saturday. Yeah, it's been quite nice, hasn't it, Adam, given the season that we've just had, to have a little bit of a break from it. I think everyone probably needed that, given how dismal and how tough it was to watch by the end of that Premier League season.
I don't really think my memories of Norwich City season has been helped by watching England over the last week, to be honest. If anything, that's been as bad, if not worse. So, yeah, other than that, I am enjoying the break away from Norwich City. I've delved into the world of DIY, not a new career, just a temporary measure at the moment. So, probably a sign I'm getting old and the football needs to come back for that reason.
Absolutely, yeah. There's worse things to do with your summer. I've got. I think my dad's currently outside pressure washing the patio, which is a typical summer job, isn't it? So we're definitely at that stage. But alas, let's turn our attentions back to Norwich City in the football, because we've got plenty to discuss. Even though it's the off season and it's approaching about a month since Norwich City were beaten by Spurs. Not quite, about 9 days away or so from that. But let's start with probably the most exciting of the news that we've had from in the last week from the football club. The news that Isaac Hayden is through the door, the first summer edition, the first piece of Dean Smith's jigsaw. He's waited 7 months to make a new signing at Norwich City, and that comes in the form of Isaac Hayden as the very first one. It sounds like, and from what we gather, this was a signing very much led by him, and I think we've reported probably since about mid-April that we were expecting Dean Smith to have a bit more of a sway in terms of Norwich City's recruitment. That looks like that is what has happened here. Sam, if I throw it over to you, Isaac Hayden, what are your thoughts on that addition to Norwich City's squad?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up Dean Smith's hand in it, because I think he's the sort of player that, from the little amount of information we've been able to gather from what Dean Smith likes in the last few months, he seems to fit all of those things. And you wrote a really good piece for the app, actually, about the intangibles. And I think there's a lot of that in this signing, a lot about hard work and attitude. And it's a different type of signing to what we maybe saw under Daniel Farke. Not that often will we see in, English players with Premier League experience. And I think credit to Stuart Webber and to Dean Smith for spotting a perfect time to pounce when a player with that amount of experience was available, because rarely do you get somebody that's played 5 consecutive Premier League seasons going on loan to the Championship, with probably a reasonable fee if those requirements are met, and he does end up at Carrow Road permanently. So I think it's a pretty good deal, a pretty encouraging deal, and probably one that rounds up exactly what Dean Smith is looking for in his players. I don't know if this was on purpose or if it was just a coincidence, but it feels like quite a statement to me as to the direction things are going forwards in.
Yeah, it does feel like a signing that actually the rest of the Championship would have sat back and gone, oh dear. It felt a little bit like that in terms of name, in terms of someone who's got size, got presence, has played the last 5 years in the Premier League. And it's interesting what you said there about Dean Smith, because I remember, and Adam would have been there as well, being sat in his first press conference, and he was asked the question, what does a Dean Smith team look like? What will a Norwich City team look like under Dean Smith? And he immediately came back with, it will look like a team that works hard. And that is almost in line with the first arrival that we've seen on his watch, Adam, which is Isaac Hayden, a player who, as we've discussed, feels like someone who maybe doesn't have the technical elements that we're perhaps used to from Norwich City midfielders under Daniel Farke, but perhaps has that mentality, sets those standards, has those intangibles, those leadership qualities that actually it felt like Norwich City did lack last year at times, particularly in the middle of the pitch.
Yeah, it's strange. I think he's the kind of signing that probably most fans would have been happy with if Norwich would have got him last summer in the Premier League, and I actually think he'd have probably given us a lot bigger chance of survival. I think his sort of qualities in terms of just being able to pass the ball, he's a hard worker, he'll graft in the midfield, and I sort of looked at his stats and 41 yellow cards in 197 games. I mean, that gives me flashbacks of Alex Tettey in the way that he's just going to be that defensive shield in front of the back four or the back five, depends on what system Dean Smith goes with. And I just think it's that ability to win duels, the ability to win the ball back, get it forward for maybe some more technical midfielders that might be in front of him, like some Lays Malou, if he gets his opportunities, that can maybe get those passes forward, get the wide men in, and I think Norwich can build off him. So that's a really good first addition this summer, and one I was quite pleased with, and I'm probably quite surprised that he's made that step down to the Championship, because obviously that interview that you done with the Newcastle journalist saying that, he's surprised maybe that a team that's sort of in that bottom sort of bracket in the Premier League didn't pick him up, because he's got the ability there to play in the Premier League still.
Yeah, and it is also read a piece the other day that said it felt like he was one of Newcastle's more saleable assets as well. So the fact that Norwich City managed to get him on a loan, the fact it's kind of performance-based obligations, from kind of what I can gather, that is both a combination of promotion and him hitting a certain amount of appearances this season. Of course, he's had quite a bad knee injury in the last year or so. So I'd imagine that is why that's been inserted. So it would be interesting to see how that transpires. A little bit different from the deals that Norwich City did with Ben Gibson and Dimitris Giannoulis to get those to the club, but albeit quite similar in terms of structure, really. Sam, I've been slightly surprised, and that's partly why I wrote the piece that you referenced, that some people have looked at the signing of Isaac Hayden and gone, oh, well, Norwich City aren't going to play attractive attacking football under Dean Smith next season. I don't really see those two things lining up. You look at what Dean Smith has said publicly about this being a side that was constructed to play possession-based football. And then he's also said that actually he feels at times they're a bit too nice, a little bit too soft. I think we probably saw that in the middle of the pitch. The defence wasn't given enough protection. You look at some of the top teams, Manchester City have Fernandinho, Liverpool have Fabinho. You can go down the list and list them all. Chelsea have had Kante for a number of years. Even that Barcelona side under Pep Guardiola all those years ago that played total football had Busquets and others in it, Xavi as well, who was an excellent footballer, but also very switched on defensively. It doesn't necessarily mean that Norwich City signing Isaac Hayden means that we're going to see a Tony Pulis-esque style of play next season, does it? It just means that Dean Smith has looked at that area of the pitch. We feel he's going to play a 4-3-3 as a number 6, someone who can shield the defence, someone who can impose a bit of physicality. I think most people who have watched Norwich City over the last year or so would say that that's something that's probably been widely needed since Ollie Skipp departed.
Yeah, I think that's the exact key point, is that Alex Tettey and Ollie Skipp were the two alternating in those defensive positions when Norwich were last promoted, and their football was lauded for being beautiful and attractive and good passing football. And neither of those two, I think, was technically the strongest. You reference the likes of Kante and players like that. Technically, Kante isn't as good as even, let's say, Mario Vrancic, right? But Vrancic was struggling to get in a team that was possession-based and technically good, kept the ball on the floor and attacked for most of the game. Kante is one of the world's best defensive midfielders in a team that occasionally and in different systems that have played attractive football. So it's a balancing act, and it's a whole as a whole. You can definitely afford to have one Isaac Hayden in the team. There'll be, the likelihood is that Grant Hanley will be at centre back, and technically he's certainly lacking compared to some of the world's leading centre backs. That doesn't mean that they're going to play direct football all the time. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I think, as I said, I think Isaac Hayden is the perfect example of what Dean Smith wants, and that probably changes things slightly. But just because they've signed Hayden, that isn't going to be them playing Route 1 football alone. I think every good team needs that bit of ballast, and Norwich have been lacking it, as you said, since Skip went. So it's almost that sort of cliche, earn the right to play sort of thing. They didn't have the players to do that. They didn't have the players to match the physicality and the work rate of other teams before they could then play their football last season. So hopefully Isaac Hayden will bring that. Isaac Hayden will match the physicality brought by other Championship teams, and he'll bring Norwich up to a par, on those standings. And I'm sure Stuart Webber and Dean Smith would back themselves to lead that squad to Championship promotion with their technical quality.
You heard it here first. Mario Vrancic better technically than N'Golo Kante. I'm pretty sure that's never, ever been uttered on a podcast before, but I absolutely love that we're the first one to do it. So well done, Sam, for that. I'm sure everyone listening will completely agree with that, but I get your point, and it's a right one to make as well. For me, it's about balance. I think the amount of time that we looked at a Norwich City midfield last season and it just didn't balance. You had someone like Billy Gilmore who wants to get on the ball and tick things over, but actually there probably wasn't the players in around him, either the legs or the defensive nous, to cover that off when he couldn't quite track back in the way that maybe Norwich City would have wanted him to or needed him to in the system that they opted to play. So it feels to me, Adam, like he's looked at an area of the squad. Obviously, there's a little bit of necessity to this as well, right? Because Norman Rupp and Gilmore have all departed. But he's looked at that central area of the pitch. And it feels to me like he is attempting to address what was quite an imbalance last year, because it was a midfield that didn't really affect things going forward, nor did it really stop goals going in at the other end. It was a relatively, well, it was a weak spot for Norwich City. Maybe it was the weak spot. So as a first move to address that issue, Isaac Hayden feels quite significant in terms of signings. It probably feels like a defensive midfielder, if you want to bracket it like that, was probably at the top or near to the top of most fans' wish list this summer.
Yeah, I think it's probably top of my list. Obviously, Sorensen is the only one that I'd maybe put in that category of a slightly more defensive midfielder, but he doesn't really have that physical presence. I think he's a much better passer of the ball, but defensively, he's not necessarily sort of going to get nasty and make that really big tackle in that moment of the game where you need to win the ball back. So I do think Norwich never replaced Skip. Obviously, that's ultimately what every fan noticed from minute one last season. Matthias Norman, who they brought in to kind of try and fit that mould, just was not the defensive midfielder that Ollie Skip was. Ollie Skip, mopped up everything. There was not a single player that really got past him. He just knew how to win the ball in the same way that Tatey did, except Tatey was a lot more clumsy, I'd say, in the way he picked up yellow cards. So, yeah, I think that is probably the kind of signing that Norwich needed. It's a big step forward, and one that for the Championship, I think the calibre of player they've got there as well is probably a step up from maybe what they've had as well in the past. I think Skip obviously was maybe a young player, and nobody really expected him to be quite as good as he was. I think Isaac Hayden, I think we all know what we're going to get with him. Obviously, he's got promotions from the Championship under his belt already. He's played quite a number of games in the Premier League as well, so he knows English football. He knows he's not necessarily experienced in the sense of he's not like sort of a mid-30-year-old, but he's still only, 27? So he's kind of getting towards that point where he's getting towards the peak of his career, and if he can keep himself injury-free and have a really good season at Norwich and kick on, then I think there's a real bit of hope there this season that we've got sort of the complete midfielder that maybe we haven't had for quite a while in that defensive area.
Yeah, absolutely. Feels like one that you'd kind of put under the good egg category, when you have those players that every manager wants and that's low maintenance and sets examples, maintains standards around the group. I think that is probably what Dean Smith is looking for with this edition. Of course, we've kind of seen that he's favoured since he's come in quite an experienced spine to the team. He's kind of favoured Krul. At times he's played Gibson and Hanley. He's played McLean and another. Pukki was involved in that. The centre of the team was always quite experienced, and then maybe it was around that he would introduce a John Rowe, a Tony Springett, or whatever. So it to me feels like a solidification of that spine, but also an addition to an area of the pitch that felt quite unbalanced and was probably quite ineffective for Norwich City, and that he probably wants a bit more physicality on. And like you say, that yellow card stat as well. What was I'm trying to think of what game it was, but he made that statement, didn't he, about how they played a certain amount of time in a game and hadn't picked up a yellow card. So that's probably quite telling as well, in terms of the insinuation that he felt he had a Norwich City team that sort of wilted under adversity, which is not a position that anyone wants to be in, really. So Isaac Hayden in the door, the first one. If we cover off transfer stuff very quickly, because I'm aware that a lot of our summer is going to be spent speaking about addressing transfers. So Sam, if I throw it over to you, in terms of what else we're expecting, I think on the whole we're probably expecting a relatively quiet window in terms of incomings, with the caveat, of course, that probably a lot of what Norwich City will do or may do is probably going to be around outgoings and a major sale, which of course they'll look to do this summer, as they try and do every summer.
Yeah, I think we all know the name that's most likely in that major sale category, and that's Max Aarons. If they manage to shift him for a price that they're happy with, that really does significantly change the amount of business they can do. And I can see the positives to that more than I have before, with the likes of Emi Buendia, James Maddison, Ben Godfrey, the likes of those players. And I know that obviously the sale of Maddison propped them up very well, but the difference with Max Aarons is that he's a right back, and he's not really in the Trent Alexander-Arnold mould of notionally being a right back, but actually being one of the key players. He's a very, very good right back, one of the best Norwich have had probably ever. But at the end of the day, he's just very good at being a right back, and if they can get that money, it will go quite far, I think, by Championship standards. Obviously, we saw them get that wrong in terms of selling a star man in Emi Buendia last summer, and then not spread. They spread that money too thinly, really, and without getting enough quality to really compete in the Premier League. But Emi Buendia was a star man. He was at the heart of every attack. He was grabbing the ball by the horns when it wasn't going right for Norwich. Top of the assists chart, near the top of the goal scoring chart, and it's a different situation with Max Aarons, really. So I can understand why they'd look to do that, and it does pretty much look like a lot of their business hinges on that. Without that being done, then our understanding is that there's not going to be a lot of business, and that they'll probably continue to look quite heavily into the loan market. We've seen over the last couple of years, with mixed levels of success, that they've heavily favoured that approach of loan to buy agreements. Obviously works quite well for them with Ben Gibson and Dimi Yunulis, not so well with Ozan Kabak, Matthias Norman last season. So yeah, obviously Isaac Hayden is the first in the door. He's the first with that sort of agreement in mind. Obviously this is an obligation rather than an option, but it does have those caveats that you suggested, with the appearances and promotion likely involved in those. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them enter the market in a similar way again. But a lot of it does hinge on those exits. Yeah,
I know loan moves and deals that get structured like this, Adam, tend to get quite a bit of flack, because everyone wants a permanent player, right? And that is the ideal in every situation. But I don't actually mind this situation where you've got a player coming in who is on loan, but there's actually an option or an obligation based on certain caveats to make it permanent later down the line. It preserves the club kind of financially. It means that promotion, then obviously it makes it a less risky deal than it would be right now to go out and sign a player for £8-9 million, which it would have been in the instance of all these players most likely. I know it's as Sam said, it's had varied success, but is there actually a lot of sense in terms of Norwich City structuring deals in this way, loans with options or obligations to buy, hinged on whether they get promoted or not?
I'm personally quite a big fan of it. I think obviously Norwich could not fundamentally go out and buy Isaac Hayden in terms of the cost that he would demand or Newcastle would demand. So Norwich effectively have got themselves a sort of bottom half Premier League player on loan in the Championship, which if they had to go out and maybe find a League One player that maybe fits the bracket of where Norwich could afford to, or the sort of pond they could fish in to try and get a player, that player is not necessarily going to step up and make the mark. They probably have to go find that younger talent, a bit like what they've done with the likes of a Jolis or whatever, that just has not worked out. And, you know, these kind of younger players that then you might think, oh, in the future they might have a sell-on fee, where Isaac Hayden, ultimately, if he's just a lone player in Norwich, even if he then kicks on next season, he's ultimately still Newcastle's player unless Norwich have reached the threshold to get him on a permanent deal. So there is obviously the pros and cons to it, but I personally think it's quite a good deal. I think it's an opportunity for Isaac Hayden. He's going to be hungry. He's going to be determined to keep himself fit, you know, kick on. And he knows that if he can get Norwich back to the Premier League and he can get himself in that starting 11 and makes enough appearances, that he's ultimately back in the Premier League again. So there's an incentive for him personally and for Norwich as well to get that kind of player in. So, yeah, I'm personally a big fan of it, and I can see Norwich doing more of those kind of deals like they have done over the past few seasons.
Spot on. Right, away from transfers, let's step onto the love train. Let's talk all things Alan Russell, Norwich City's first specialist coach, first set-piece coach. He's been appointed as part of Dean Smith's coaching team. A fairly, really positive CV, actually. He worked with England. He was assistant manager formerly at Aberdeen under Stephen Glass, which didn't work too well for the pair of them. They were dismissed in February because of poor results. But predominantly a striking coach. That's how he began his career. Now a kind of set-piece specialist coach who worked with England at the 2018 World Cup, where I think 9 of the 12 goals they scored were set pieces. And that infamous love train reference I speak about, I think it was christened that by Glenn Hoddle. They scored a countless number of goals from that particular routine. Most set-piece goals in the tournament. He also improved Aberdeen's quite substantially. I mean, Sam, it's an area that Dean Smith has spoken about for a while as wanting someone in. He worked with 2 set-piece coaches at Brentford. He had Austin McPhee at Aston Villa, who I think he would have really liked to brought to Norwich. If Steven Gerrard wouldn't have kept him around. It's an area that he likes. It's a member of his coaching team that he likes. And given Norwich City scored the fewest amount of set-piece goals in the Premier League last season, it's an area which, to quote Dean Smith's words to you, does seem to have a lot of untapped potential.
Yeah, and they can definitely improve on that output. It's been something they've struggled with for a long time, really. I mean, I don't think they struggled to defend set pieces to as great an extent as they did maybe 2 years ago. But yeah, it's been a problem for a while, really, especially when you look at the aerial prowess of some of the players they've got in the box for those situations. You know, Grant Hanley, Ben Gibson, Andrew Omobamidele obviously showed from one of the few Norwich goals scored from set pieces last season that he can do that sort of thing. So yeah, getting somebody in who can maximise the potential of those sorts of players will probably add a lot to Norwich next season. You know, we've been saying for years, and they failed to do it really, that Tony Pukki needs to have the burden, the goal scoring burden, eased on him a little bit, and that's pretty much that's quite an easy way to do that, really. You know, it takes a lot of work to find ways of midfielders scoring and creating from open play in different ways when there are set pieces there to be exploited. And you know, as you outlined, it's been a very important area that Dean Smith's looked at. He's obviously been keen on getting a set piece coach into Norwich since his arrival, so he'll be delighted to have Alan Russell, and the CV suggests that he'll bring a lot. So I'm sure that'll be pleasing for Norwich fans. Yeah,
I wrote a piece on Alan Russell. You can read it on the PinkUn Plus app about kind of him, England's love train, a bit of a story around him, some of his work at Aberdeen as well. It was a completely different kind of routine that he implemented there. It was a bit more of a diamond rather than a straight line, and they had quite a bit of success with that. I think they were certainly at one stage leading the set piece goals in Scotland. So there's evidence that where Alan Russell goes, set piece goals follow, which from a Norwich City perspective is good news. And as we said, Adam and Sam makes a really interesting point and a really good point there, actually, about easing the burden on Teemu Pukki. You look at some of the players that Norwich City have in their squad, they're probably players like, immediately off the top of my head, Grant Hanley, Ben Gibson, Kenny McLean, who of course has scored from a corner against Manchester City before. There are players in there who we know do have aerial capabilities, but for whatever reason, be it by design, be it not very good deliveries, be it whatever you want to attribute it to. They haven't scored many goals in that area. And if they can get an advantage, it has been shown to work. I mean, Brentford, for example, scored the third most amount of set pieces in the Premier League last season. It was a really big factor into why they stayed in the Premier League. So it's big for the Championship and getting out of that, but perhaps more widely, it can be a really important ingredient to perhaps a Premier League survival bid later down the line.
Yeah, I think it's something that Norwich need to build off. Obviously, the Championship is a lot more physical. There's a lot more taller, present players in that league. So it's the kind of league that you need to be good at your set pieces, both from an attacking sense and a defending sense, because it's a way that you can win games. I mean, if you have a 90-minute corner and you can nick a free, 3 points rather than one in a game with a 1-0 win, then that's the way you can go and clinch the title. And it's something that Norwich have been quite good at historically, Dan, in the past in the Championship. They've won games late on, sort of through their ability to score a set piece or defend a set piece. So if they can utilise the likes of Grant Hanley and Ben Gibson, even Omobamidele, I mean, he scored against Leeds this season. So there's an opportunities there to use those players and their aerial presence to win games. Then Norwich need to capitalise on that and definitely build off that for the Premier League. And obviously Alan Russell, a man that I saw some quotes, he's up till midnight some nights studying set pieces. He's got a bit of a passion for it. I've never known anyone to really have a passion for set pieces, but this guy seems to be the only man maybe present in the world at the moment that does. So if Norwich have got him on board, then you might as well use that to your advantage. And to me, that's, seems like a very astute appointment and one that I was quite pleased with. And as you said, I think when he's been to other sort of clubs or managed England or been part of the England management team as well, a lot of these sort of clubs and the countries have benefited from him being in amongst it. So I think Aberdeen scored, I think it was 5 set piece goals from their first 12 games last season. So if Norwich can kind of get a similar statistic in the Championship, then that seems like a good way to get this winning mentality back and by picking up some points through maybe scoring 3 set pieces.
We live Norwich City.
The build-up.
The passion.
The drama.
The last-minute winners.
The debate.
That's why we've created PinkUn Plus.
The app that takes you beyond the headlines.
With exclusive columns, blogs, podcasts and videos, we've got you covered.
Subscribe today. PinkUn Plus. Stay ahead of the game.
Download now on the App Store and on Google Play.
Yeah, and for all the brilliance that Daniel Farke brought to Norwich City, it was an area of the game that we never really saw them really excel at, certainly from an attacking perspective. And in those games where, and we all know what it's like in the Championship, it's a slog. There are games where your performance isn't quite where it needs to be. You are relying on fine margins or a moment or a goal just to change it, just to turn 1 point into 3. And actually a set piece is a really good opportunity to do that. And actually it probably goes under the radar a little bit that you look at all the top teams, as we spoke about earlier with defensive midfielders, actually a lot of the top teams score a lot of goals from set pieces as well. So it's a part of the game that feels underutilized. And if this is Norwich City, as we know they have to do in whatever area, be it transfers, be it tactically, be it in terms of youth development, they have to get small wins, marginal gains. If this is another way of doing that, then that to me seems like a positive. They're also recruiting for a psychologist as well, which is another position that Dean Smith wants to add to his coaching team as well. Not coaching team, but add to his backroom staff as well, which feels quite significant given our earlier chat about mentality and how they shift that, particularly possibly around shifting a losing culture. Sam, for kind of all the criticism that we, just to stay on set pieces for a moment, and then we'll move on to other things, for all the criticisms that we gave of Norwich City last season and for all the things that they did poorly, which was a lot of football, let's be honest, there was probably a positive in the fact that certainly from defensive set pieces, they weren't terrible. I mean, they conceded I think there were 6 teams who conceded more from set pieces than them. I mean, that's not too bad by Norwich City standards. So it does feel purely like Russell comes in with almost a blank canvas of what he wants to do, how he achieves it. But also there is probably a room for improvement at both ends. But at least he's building, I suppose, unlike from other areas of Norwich City's team at the moment, he's building from a relatively strong base. Is that fair to say based on what they did there last season?
Yeah, and a lot of that's to do with the sort of names we listed in terms of the the players with aerial prowess, Kenny McLean, Grant Hanley, Ben Gibson, Andrew Omobamidele, and a lot of them really. I think that's probably because defensively it's more of a clear job, really. Once you've got your zonal or your man marking sorted, you know your job on pretty much every opposition set piece, whereas attack-wise, you're looking more at different ways to be creative with it and different setups to disrupt high-level defences, which are going to be set up really well to deal with the most basic of set pieces. So I think probably what Alan Russell is bringing to the table most is ideas and the ability to generate ideas given a set of players to work with. Obviously, he's done that at England, and he didn't rest on his laurels and just try and do exactly the same thing at Aberdeen. But because he would have looked at their strengths and other factors around that and said, okay, that same bus stop or love train method isn't going to work here. I need to do something different. And I'm sure that's what he'll do at Norwich. He'll look at the personnel that he has. He'll look at the capabilities that certain players have and fit them, generate ideas based on that knowledge. I think that's probably the difference between attacking and defensive. It's probably much more clear and simple to defend a set piece than it is to find ways to score from one. And that's where that expert knowledge is going to come in handy with Russell coming to Carrow Road. Obviously, Dean Smith is open to those ideas. I'm sure he will have some of his own, but it shows, I think, a strength of delegation to be able to admit that he doesn't have all the answers and that he'll bring in other people. I think that was a weakness of Daniel Farke's management, probably, was that he had, yes, he had his people that he trusted, but it was quite a closed club in terms of who he would allow in to help him do that job. And Dean Smith bringing in Alan Russell to do that, I think, shows a strength.
It's constant innovation as well, isn't it, with that particular type of coaching? Because once you find a way that's cracked the code, people adapt to it. They find ways to counter it. And I suppose that's coaching generally, but particularly with set pieces, if you've got a really effective method, suddenly people latch onto that, particularly in the age of video analysis and numbers at everyone's fingertips. I think it's relatively easy to see where teams are getting those gains and getting those margins now as well. So part of Alan Russell's job, which hasn't perhaps been discussed really at length, is the fact that it's always going to change, it's always going to evolve, he's going to have to constantly find answers to different solutions, and that's going to be something that I find really interesting. But I think we probably need to lump on Grant Hanley being top scorer or near the top of the goal scoring list next season, right? If he can improve his output from set pieces, that's going to be very interesting. It's the second kind of pillar of a week of real news for Norwich City. The third one, Andrew Omobamidele's contract. I mean, this is one that we've been expecting. We're probably expecting a couple more in the next couple of weeks. But Adam, really positive, isn't it? Because when we talk about Max Aarons and asset building and youth development, it does feel like, if you're going to look at the next one off the production line, it does feel like it's Andrew Omobamidele with the performances that we've seen on the pitch, which, although feels like quite a lot, is still quite a limited number, really. I think he played, he didn't play many games this season, only played 7 at the back end of the championship campaign. But everything we've seen has made probably everyone in the Norwich City sphere think, hang on a second, we've got a player on our hands here. Yeah,
just the 14 games for Norwich in his professional senior career so far. So he is relatively inexperienced. Obviously, he has now got himself in the Ireland fold as well. So that's obviously another positive for him. But ultimately, last season was disappointing just from an injury perspective for him, because I do feel like he would have got more opportunities. And obviously, he's not really had that chance to impress Dean Smith yet, even on the training pitch, because he's obviously been out with injury. So I do feel like next season's a big year for him if he can keep himself fit. I mean, you look at Ben Godfrey in the Championship in that title-winning season in 18-19 and how good he became and how better, like as a better player he became through the development of the Championship, just playing week in, week out. So if Andrew Omobamidele can get something similar, then I think in terms of the physicality, I think he's actually probably bigger and physically stronger than what Godfrey was. So to me, that if you can maybe build him alongside a Grant Hanley as an experienced pro, just to give him those tips in the games that, you know, effectively Norwich, you'd imagine, will go and dominate quite a lot of games with the squad they're going to have in the Championship. It takes the pressure off him a little bit and gives him an opportunity to play his game as he wants to. And, you know, he's good passing. He can pass from the back as well. So if he can get those, spring the balls forward and get Norwich on the attack, then I think there's a player there to build from next season. He just needs to keep himself fit. That's obviously going to be the main goal for him next season.
Yeah, I remember speaking to someone when he broke through who said to me that he was ahead of where Ben Godfrey was physically at the same age, which is fairly frightening, really. But all of the components, Sam, that you want in a centre back, doesn't he? He's almost one of those centre backs that just makes everything look relatively effortless, which to do that at a young age is really quite impressive. And I suppose from Norwich City's perspective, I'm always slightly concerned with back injuries in young players, but part of that could be growth, which if he grows any more, then he's going to be quite the aerial threat. But he has all of the components to become a top player. It now feels like it's down to Dean Smith and his coaching team to mould him into whatever they want to be. But to sort of move this forward to next season, it does feel like there's probably a vacancy next to Grant Hanley in the back line.
Yeah, and that's probably more to do with Ben Gibson's plight in the last few weeks than it is anything else. But yeah, he has all the aspects, and it's interesting that you brought up that the fact that he makes things look effortless, because the first name that came to my head when I was thinking about players that look like that was Virgil van Dijk. And there are times when you watch him playing for Liverpool.
Has he got better technical ability than Virgil van Dijk?
I don't think I'm going to say that, to be honest. I think that would be probably a risk too far for my own integrity. But I think yeah, there are times when you watch Liverpool and Van Dijk looks almost like the laziest player on the pitch, because he just looks like he's strolling around. And there's a similar vibe sometimes about Omobamidele and his movement. A very intelligent player, and I think that's actually the main difference. I think you both just spoke about the physical difference between Godfrey and Omobamidele at this age. I think Omobamidele is probably quite far ahead in terms of his brain in the game, and I think he reads the game quite a lot better than Godfrey did at this age, and his positioning is quite a lot better. That was a big downfall for Norwich in the 2019-20 season. Was yes, Godfrey was great when when it was last ditch and there was only one option and he had to block the ball or he had to sprint back to be in a certain position or he had to clear it off the line. I think those subtle positional adjustments are probably where Omobamidele thrives over a lot of players his age. He plays like somebody that's got a lot more appearances than he has, and that's why I think a lot of Norwich fans feel like he's had much more of a career than he has. I wrote his report card, and I can't remember his exact number of Norwich appearances, but I believe it's less than 20, which is really strange to think about, especially when you saw the reaction to that contract news. But yeah, I think he can go so far, and truth is, if he realises his potential, he won't be a Norwich player in 2 or 3 years' time, and this contract won't get seen out.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? It does feel like he's played a lot more football than he has at his young age. Not really sure why that feels like it's the case, but it definitely does. But maybe that's a testament to the impact that he's had in a relatively short period of time, because he came in, obviously, in that game against Preston, where Norwich City had a lot of players who had just come back from international duty. There was that utterly mad turnaround in fixtures the EFL got wrong, and never really looked back from there, and has always looked quite composed and quite intelligent, and almost had a bit of the Max Aarons about him, where once he got in, it never really felt like he was going to come out again or head out on loan. It kind of felt like he was ready in the here and now, which is unbelievably exciting at the age that he is, and his ceiling does feel really significant. Now it's obviously about making sure that potential transfers into something, and we see that in performances regularly. And as we've already spoken about, it does feel like there's probably a slot in the back four for him to do it, which maybe negates the need for Norwich City to dip into the transfer market and add a centre back to what they have already, because he, in many ways, because he missed the second half of the season, feels like he's in that cliched, feels like a new signing kind of bracket, but also is young enough to learn, develop, maybe dip in and out if need be as well next season. So I'm very excited for Andrew Omobamidele and to watch him, because I think, as we've discussed, his ceiling is absolutely enormous, and his development is going to be absolutely fascinating to see how it transpires. Right, gents. I mean, we're going to fly off to Brazil now to Curitiba to talk about Norwich City's new link up. It is a kind of a football link up. I think the idea, certainly from what I can gather, is this is based on Norwich City stepping up their recruitment efforts in South America. It's about Obviously, that's a market that they've scouted. They've scouted individual countries. They've looked at the area more broadly. They have scouts based in the region now, because of obviously the change in rules after Brexit and the possibility to sign more players from that area. It's almost like with one door closing, and you can view that as like the Scandinavian market, for example. Another one opens. The South American market is now much more available than it was. Norwich City are hoping to benefit from that. This feels to me like an opportunity to gain access, certainly from what I can understand, to Cortiba's recruitment network, to their data, to their analytics, to their base, their knowledge of South American football, which obviously will be far ahead of what Norwich City's are, even 3 years into their expedition, I suppose, in this part of the world. But also, I do wonder, this is me just kind of thinking out loud, whether there's an element of, if Norwich City do sign a South American talent who is unable to get a work permit or doesn't qualify for a work permit, perhaps there's the opportunity for them to be sent on loan to this club, who are 7th in the Brazilian top flight. So they're no minnows by any extent. But we'll come to Adam first, and then we'll go to Sam on this. So Adam, what are your thoughts on this tie-up? It's an interesting one. It's not one that's too common. I mean, Norwich have had these partnerships before, and they've kind of popped up and then seem to evaporate and disappear in the background not long after. We don't really hear much about them. This has been given quite a bit of fanfare by Stuart Webber. Some of his quotes, he described this as a new and exciting relationship that will allow Norwich to continue their development and reach into new territories. Speaks about Brexit, mutually beneficial for both clubs over the coming weeks, months and years. This feels like a long-term tie-up, doesn't it? So is this something that will excite fans? I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because of what we've seen in the past, as I mentioned, with previous tie-ups. I'm sure people will remember Parma, or we could list several other clubs.
Yeah, I think the excitement will come if something comes up this partnership. At the moment, it's very hard to really tell, because a lot of people are quite unaware of really what benefits it's going to have for Norwich. But in terms of recruitment, if Norwich can dip themselves into that South American market where there is quite a lot of value, and if you can pick out a little bit of a gem and he turns out to become a relatively decent star, whether that be at the Championship or Premier League level, then there's obviously money to be made. And let's face it, that is at the moment the sort of core value of Norwich City Football Club is to find these talents, develop them, and sell them on for more money. So obviously we all know a certain South American that turned out to be quite good for Norwich City. Not that he came from South America directly, but Omobamidele. And I look at Watford. I mean, they're a similar stature club to Norwich, and they've obviously had Richarlison originally come through, and then they obviously more recently João Pedro. That I think both those talents they bought for obviously a lot less and sold on for, or João Pedro's still there, but obviously he'll have a further sell-on value for Watford than what they paid. So I think if Norwich can kind of extract that kind of talent and ultimately develop them, sell them on, then there's definitely something positive to be had from it. And obviously the culture over in Brazil is going to be drastically different from a recruitment sense and a sort of football coaching management sense. And if Norwich can even just get little snippets of sort of elements of sort of their sort of way they deal with football and the strategy, then I think that's definitely positive to bring to Norwich, especially if they want to sort of play that more attractive football, which obviously notoriously is well known to be played in Brazil.
Sam, what are your thoughts on this tie-up? It's certainly an interesting one, isn't it? It's an eyebrow-raising one, and it's one that, as Adam says, it's really hard to comment on what this looks like until we know the exact details of what it really entails. But just off the bat, from kind of what's been said and what's been announced so far, what's your kind of thoughts and reflections on this?
Yeah, I'm fairly skeptical. I think the announcement from the club said a lot about how great the partnership is going to be, but it didn't really say how. It just, there was a lot of quotes, this will help us do this and this and this. But yeah, not really a lot of tangible content in terms of what it's actually going to look like. And we see these sorts of things, these partnerships quite a lot. You look at the Tampa Bay Rowdies partnership, for example, and I know that's more of a commercial one, but how often do we actually hear about the Tampa Bay Rowdies, apart from when Norwich starts stocking their replica shirts in the club shop, or go for an Easter break there to do some training? So I'm open to being surprised, but yeah, it doesn't look right now like we're gonna really find out for a little while what this might actually look like. And I'm sure there will be things being done. There would have been no point in them exploring this partnership and announcing it if it wasn't going to make at least some sort of difference. But I would have probably appreciated a bit more explanation as to what it looked like in the club's announcement. Obviously, we haven't had the opportunity to ask the question as to what that might look like, and yeah, it's just all at the moment. It's all just saying how great it's going to be. So yeah, I don't really know what to make of it. It's hard to come down on either side at the moment. We might just have to give it time, and then if we see a couple of great examples, a couple of great South American players coming through the Norwich ranks, we might know where that's come from. If we hear nothing for the next 2 years, then that's probably fair to criticise that.
Yeah, I guess the one that makes this different from, say, the Tampa Bay type is that was always very much advertised as kind of a commercial tie-up. This is very much a football tie-up, which is the interesting thing. I'm not sure. I'm sure people will get in touch and correct if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if Norwich have I'm sure they must have had an official football tie-up and one that is maybe with a view to kind of sharing recruitment resources and stuff like that. That's quite, feels like it could be quite innovative, but like you, Sam, I think there's probably a degree of skepticism of having seen partnerships like this pop up and disappear and disappear as quickly as they pop up. So I think that skepticism is natural. I'm not sure it will really excite fans at this moment in time. It will only really excite fans if it results in an uplift on the pitch and an improvement in performances, and that's going to be very difficult to say to tell unless, like you say, there's some South American talent who comes in and really lifts the quality threshold in the team. It does to me feel like at the moment South America is maybe a more of a market for younger players than kind of first team players at this moment in time. If that changes in a few seasons' time, we'll have to see. But all very interesting stuff. To end the pod, gents, and I apologise for kind of springing this on you, but it's something that has come into my mind. We've of course had the kind of Proud Canaries stuff that has come out in the last week. Of course, Norwich City did a home for it, or launched their Home for Everyone campaign around homophobia. It involved a video which included the Proud Canaries. Kenny McLean was in it, hosted by Darren Eady. It was an initiative by the club designed to kind of highlight in quite raw fashion the impact of homophobic language and abuse and slurs. And there was probably, I think it's fair to say that there was a tweet that angered quite a fair bit, not just of the Proud Canaries, who obviously slammed back against it, but also of portions of the LGBTQ plus community when they just tweeted the wall, which was essentially just the wall in before it had kind of had paint thrown over it that included all the slurs in kind of uncensored form. There was questions about why some words were chosen, why some words were omitted. It was all a little bit cloudy. But Sam, I mean, it's obviously a very serious issue that we're not going to go too depth into, because I'm very conscious that we're probably not the right demographic to really be talking about how it impacts or affects us, right? So that does make it a little bit more challenging. But by the same token, it did feel to me when I saw that tweet, I remember thinking, it's not going to go down well. And it kind of feels like, I don't want to broaden this out and really use it as like an attack line at the comms strategy, because it's not that at all. But it just didn't feel well executed, when in reality, I think the idea behind it was well intentioned and also extremely positive.
Yeah, that's the exact thing, really, isn't it? You can see what they were trying to do, and you can see that the intentions were good, but the execution was just really poor. And I, like many, would have got that notification, Norwich City tweeted this, and thought, why on earth did you need to give those words a platform like that? So yeah, I was very surprised. And I think there is room in certain campaigns to do that whole, shock people at first and then give them context and everyone goes, but that isn't the time to do that sort of thing. I don't think it's a very serious issue and a very contentious issue with the potential to upset a lot of people. And I don't know if that was very well thought through. A phrase I've seen talked about a lot around this is, I think, not about us without us. Not. Yes, that's it. And I think that probably sums up the situation. Proud Canaries are saying that, although I think some of their members were involved in it, they didn't have the whole picture as to what that comms strategy would look like. Worth saying, I think that they've now deleted that tweet with no context of the slurs, so they've obviously seen that that was a mistake. But yeah, I think you have to defend the intentions, because they were trying their best to highlight issues and to address a problem in football. The execution was just really poor, and they probably should have sought a little bit more consultation from people that know better than the people that were probably in charge of making those decisions.
Yeah, it is a tough one, and I suppose you have to an extent, give them credit for recognising that tweet was ill-timed, in poor taste, and rectifying it, deleting it, and obviously respecting the views and seeking the counsel of people who are very prominent in that community and do know how those words impact people and what they're like. But you're right, it was well-intentioned, it just felt poorly executed, and that's a shame, because it's a really important campaign. And of course, it follows on at a time where we've just had a professional footballer come out as gay for the first time in a long time, and it feels like a real watershed moment for football and homophobia. I mean, a real positive that has been missed because of this whole saga with that particular tweet is that we had a member of Norwich City's men's first team on camera speaking about homophobia in football. I can't remember the last time that happened. It's something really significant. It should be noted. It should be something that is regarded as an important step, but it came in front of a wall full of slurs that hadn't been covered up by the mural, which perhaps should have happened in the reverse order. But it is what it is. It's done what it's done, and as we said, well intentioned but poorly executed. There we go, gents. Thank you very much for joining me. I think that rounds off the podcast nicely. We're going to bring these to you. I mean, it's hard to promise that we'll bring you one next week. We're obviously kind of dependent on what happens the week before and making sure that we actually have stuff to talk about, because I'm sure you wouldn't want us rambling about any old nonsense as proven maybe by the start of this pod. But as and when there's something significant to talk about, we will bring it to you in podcast form. We always like doing these for you and keeping you updated throughout the summer, where there's a little less football obviously to talk about. We should of course all be enjoying a World Cup at the moment, but we're not due to FIFA's decision-making processes, which is a whole nother podcast for another day. But anyway, subscribe to the PinkUn Plus app. We've got all of the content, all of the transfer news, everything that happens throughout this summer as we build up to the start of pre-season. And we'll see you again very, very soon.